She is adored for her endearing scenes of mothers lovingly tending to their children, charming, if archaic snapshots of a less progressive time. A little context goes a long way when it comes to appreciating Mary Cassatt's practice for how radical it really was, because if you're unfamiliar with her story, it's enlightening to discover that the woman behind all those gentle images was an outspoken suffragist who unflinchingly sauntered into traditionally male environments and redefined what it means to be feminine in the process. This is Several Circles. Edgar Degas, Berthe Morisot, Pierre-Auguste Renoir. The Impressionists bequeathed some of the 19th century's most pleasant sensory delights. Luminous and pulsing with short, charged brushstrokes, we can almost feel the breeze whisking the heavy fabric of Madame Monet's dress against her legs, and hear the resonant hum of music and chatter envelop Les Moulins de la Galette. Hazy and dreamlike, these paintings are animated by their vibrance, and that was the Impressionists' objective, not to painstakingly depict what they saw at face value, but to capture the momentary atmosphere of their subject, leaving us with an impression. Much like the style in which she painted, there's far more to Mary Cassatt's work than what meets the eye. She invites us to observe intimate, personal, and familial moments in quiet, often interior spaces. But don't let these sentimental images fool you. Cassatt was hardly domestic. Cassatt was born in 1844 in Allegheny City, a former municipality that's now the north side of Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania. She grew up in a large, affluent family, her father a stockbroker, her mother from a line of bankers, so Cassatt was raised like any respectable young lady would have been at the time, to become a consummate wife and mother. But neither role was in the cards for Cassatt, whose life would be solely devoted to art. She matriculated at the Pennsylvania Academy of Fine Arts in Philadelphia when she was 15. Although she wasn't the only girl in attendance, she was likely amongst the few who were hell-bent on going pro. The Academy proved ill-equipped to facilitate that reality for her. Drawing and painting live models was considered inappropriate for female students, and her teachers failed to take her seriousness seriously. Having already spent several of her formative years in France and Germany with her family, Cassatt decided to drop out and curate her own curriculum in Paris. Her father supposedly proclaimed that he'd rather see his daughter dead than live abroad like some bohemian, but a willful Cassatt wore her parents down, and accompanied by her mother, departed for the French capital circa 1866. The esteemed École des Beaux-Arts wouldn't open its doors to women for another 30 years, so Cassatt studied independently with illustrious French painters like Jean-Léon Gérôme and Thomas Couture. She supplemented her formal training by spending her free hours vigorously studying old master works at the Louvre. Cassatt exhibited her first painting in the 1868 Paris Salon, a prestigious annual showcase organized by the Académie des Beaux-Arts. Her inclusion in the exhibition was noteworthy. She and fellow expatriate artist Elizabeth Jane Gardner became the first American women to have their work accepted. Cassatt's studies were promptly curtailed by the onset of the Franco-Prussian War in 1870. She reluctantly sought refuge back home in Pennsylvania, though she spent the following year culture-starved and pining for her beloved Paris. A fortuitous commission from the Archbishop of Pittsburgh sent Cassatt off to the Italian city of Parma to produce copies of two works by the Renaissance painter Correggio. The money from this commission thankfully allowed her to remain in Europe, but she didn't immediately return to Paris. She lingered in Parma with Correggio and his Mannerist contemporary Parmigianino, and subsequently traveled to Belgium and Spain, basking in the glory of Peter Paul Rubens's fleshy Flemish masterpieces and Diego Velázquez's magnificent Baroque portraits. She seems to have been particularly inspired by her stay in Velázquez's native Seville, where she created a number of paintings depicting various Spanish subjects. These early paintings are rich and romantic, but they hint at the exuberance that would shine through her mature aesthetic. In 1874, Cassatt settled back in Paris for good. Her repeated inclusion in the Paris salons established a favorable reputation for her, yet she grew increasingly disillusioned with the tired principles of the Academy and recoiled at the thought of becoming a conventional commercial painter. She was far better suited to creative experimentation away from a stuffy old panel of judges. Legend has it that Edgar Degas, the French artist who immortalized the Parisian ballet, was stopped dead in his tracks by one of Cassat's paintings at the Paris Salon in 1874. Voila, he exclaimed, here's someone who feels as I do. It wasn't long afterward that Cassat was stopped in her tracks by some of Degas' pastels exhibited in a gallery window. I saw art then as I wanted to see it, she would recall. Finally, involved in society, but she became increasingly passionate about women's suffrage, the right to vote, in her later years. She was losing her eyesight to diabetes, a fate worse than death for any artist, and one that Degas succumbed to himself, but her inability to paint allowed her to refocus her efforts. Together with her friend, the American feminist and avid art collector Louisine Havemeyer, Cassat organized a 1915 exhibition to raise money for the women's suffrage movement. The show was to exhibit her work alongside Degas because they were saleable to rich Americans with a taste for the Parisian avant-garde, and because she knew that Degas would be humorously discomforted by the cause.